Elena Martinez had never believed in fairy tales or monsters hiding in shadows. At 24, she was practical, hardworking, and focused on keeping her small bakery afloat in downtown Seattle. Her world was flour-dusted aprons, early morning bread deliveries, and the constant worry about making rent. The last thing she expected was to inherit a debt that would change her life forever. The letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, delivered by a man in an expensive black suit who disappeared before she could ask questions. The envelope was thick, cream-colored paper that felt luxurious between her fingers. Inside, elegant handwriting spelled out words that made her blood run cold. "Miss Martinez, your father's obligations have passed to you. The sum of $50,000 plus interest accumulated over 15 years is now due. You have 30 days to settle this matter or face the consequences. Regards, Adrian Blackwood." Elena stared at the letter, her hands trembling. Her father, Miguel Martinez, had died 3 years ago from cancer, leaving behind only medical bills and faded photographs. He had been a construction worker, honest but poor. Where would he have borrowed such an enormous sum? And who was Adrian Blackwood? She spent the next week making phone calls, visiting lawyers, and searching through her father's papers. Nobody had heard of Adrian Blackwood. No official records existed of the debt, yet something about the letter felt terrifyingly real. The paper was expensive, the writing precise, and there was an underlying threat that made her stomach twist with anxiety. Elena's best friend, Sarah Chen, suggested she ignore it. "It's probably a scam," Sarah said over coffee at their usual spot. "Rich people don't lend money to construction workers, Elena." "Someone's trying to trick you." But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this was genuine. Her father had always been secretive about his past, especially about the years before Elena was born. He had immigrated from Mexico with nothing, yet somehow managed to buy their small house when Elena was just 5 years old. She had never questioned where the money came from. On the 15th day after receiving the letter, Elena decided to find Adrian Blackwood herself. She hired a private investigator with money she couldn't afford to spend. The investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Detective James Murphy, called her 3 days later with surprising news. "I found him," Murphy said, his voice uncertain. "But, Elena, this guy is weird. He lives in this massive mansion up in the hills, never seen during the day, and the locals all act strange when you mention his name. Some of them cross themselves like he's the devil or something." Elena drove up the winding mountain road on a foggy evening, her old Honda struggling with the steep incline. The mansion appeared suddenly through the mist, a gothic structure that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. Tall windows glowed with warm light, and ancient oak trees surrounded the property like silent guardians. She parked her car and walked up the stone pathway, her heart pounding. The front door was massive, made of dark wood with iron hinges that looked centuries old. Before she could knock, the door opened silently. A tall man stood in the doorway, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. He was perhaps 30 years old, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the dim light. Dark hair swept back from his forehead and the most striking green eyes she had ever seen. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice smooth and cultured with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I've been expecting you." Elena found her voice. "You're Adrian Blackwood?" He smiled, revealing perfect white teeth. "I am." "Please come in. We have much to discuss." The interior of the mansion was breathtaking. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that looked like it belonged in museums. Adrian led her through hallways lined with oil paintings of stern-faced people in period clothing. Elena noticed that all the curtains were drawn, despite the early evening hour. They entered a library that took Elena's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, comfortable armchairs arranged around a fireplace where flames danced without making any sound. Adrian gestured for her to sit while he poured 2 glasses of wine from a crystal decanter. "Your father was a good man," Adrian said, handing her a glass. "We had an arrangement that served us both well for many years." Elena set the wine down untouched. What kind of arrangement? My father was a construction worker. He didn't have $50,000 to borrow. Adrian settled into the chair across from her, studying her face with those unsettling green eyes. Your father came to me 15 years ago, desperate and dying. He had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer that would have killed him within months. The treatment he needed wasn't available through normal channels. What do you mean? I have access to certain remedies that conventional medicine cannot provide. I saved your father's life, Elena. I gave him 15 extra years to watch you grow up, to see you graduate from high school, to walk you down the aisle at your wedding if he had lived to see it. Elena felt tears sting her eyes. Her father's cancer had indeed been terminal when first diagnosed, but it had gone into sudden, complete remission. The doctors had called it a miracle. Even if that's true, $50,000? With interest, that's probably hundreds of thousands now. Adrian waved his hand dismissively. Money has little meaning to someone like me. I've lived for... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I've accumulated wealth over many lifetimes. The debt your father owed was not financial. Then what was it? Adrian stood and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. Your father promised me something far more valuable than money. He promised me companionship. You see, Elena, I am very old and I have been very lonely for a very long time. Your father was to introduce me to someone who might understand my unique circumstances. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of unique circumstances? Before Adrian could answer, a grandfather clock in the corner began to chime midnight. As the last chime faded, Adrian turned back to her, and Elena gasped. His eyes, which had been green, now glowed with an otherworldly golden light. His canine teeth had extended into sharp fangs, and his pale skin seemed to have an ethereal luminescence. I am what your people call a vampire, Elena, he said simply. I have existed for over 3 centuries, and in all that time I have never found someone who could accept what I am without fear or revulsion. Elena should have run. Every instinct told her to flee, to scream, to call the police. Instead, she found herself fascinated. You're serious. You're actually serious. Your father knew what I was. I saved his life using my blood, which has healing properties for humans in small doses. In return, he promised to help me find someone who might be able to see past the monster to the man underneath. And you think that someone is me? Adrian moved with inhuman grace back to his chair. I don't know, but the debt exists and it must be settled. However, I am not unreasonable. I propose a different arrangement. Elena's mouth felt dry. What kind of arrangement? Have dinner with me. 7 dinners over 7 weeks. Let me show you who I am beyond the fangs and the supernatural abilities. If, after those 7 dinners, you find me repulsive or frightening, the debt dies with me, I will disappear from your life forever. And if I don't? Adrian's smile was both charming and dangerous. Then we'll discuss more permanent arrangements. Elena stood up abruptly. This is insane. You're insane. Vampires don't exist, and even if they did, I'm not going to be some gothic romance novel heroine who falls for the mysterious monster. I'm not asking you to fall for me, Adrian said quietly. I'm asking you to see me. 1 dinner, Elena. What harm could 1 dinner do? Elena looked around the beautiful library at this impossibly handsome man who claimed to be a creature of legend and felt her carefully ordered world tilting off its axis. 1 dinner, 1 dinner. If you're uncomfortable at any point, you can leave and we'll consider the debt partially settled. Against every rational thought in her head, Elena found herself nodding. 1 dinner, but somewhere public. Not here. Adrian laughed, a rich sound that made her pulse quicken despite her fear. I'm afraid public restaurants don't serve my particular dietary requirements, but I promise you'll be perfectly safe here. I may be a predator, Elena, but I'm not a monster. There's a difference. As Elena left the mansion that night, her mind reeling with impossibilities, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn into something far more dangerous and compelling than anything she had ever imagined. She had agreed to have dinner with a vampire, and the most terrifying part was how much she was looking forward to it. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. Elena kept expecting to wake up, to find that this entire evening had been some elaborate dream brought on by stress and too much caffeine. But the business card Adrian had given her was real, made of the same expensive paper as the original letter. His phone number was written in that same elegant handwriting. Back in her small apartment above the bakery, Elena sat on her bed holding the card and trying to process what had happened. A vampire. An actual vampire had claimed her father owed him a debt and now wanted to have dinner with her. It sounded like the plot of a romance novel, except this was her life. She spent the rest of the night researching vampire mythology online, reading everything from ancient folklore to modern fiction. The more she read, the more questions she had. If Adrian was telling the truth, if vampires really existed, what did that mean for everything else she thought she knew about the world? Elena's phone buzzed with a text message at exactly sunrise. It was from an unknown number, but she knew it was Adrian. Dinner tomorrow at 8. I'll send a car. Wear something comfortable. ATA. She stared at the message for a long time before typing back, I'll drive myself. His response came immediately. As you wish. Until tomorrow, Elena. Elena set her phone aside and tried to get some sleep, but her dreams were filled with golden eyes and dangerous smiles. Tomorrow she would have dinner with a vampire. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with an anticipation she couldn't explain and didn't want to examine too closely. Elena spent the entire next day in a state of nervous energy that made it impossible to concentrate on work. She burned 2 batches of croissants, forgot to add sugar to her famous chocolate chip cookies, and nearly sliced her finger while cutting bread. Her employees, Marcus and Jennifer, kept exchanging worried glances. Boss, maybe you should go home early, Marcus suggested during the lunch rush. You seem really distracted today, Elena forced a smile. I'm fine, just didn't sleep well last night. How could she explain that she was having dinner with a vampire? The whole situation felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life. Part of her hoped Adrian wouldn't show up, that this was all an elaborate prank. But another part of her, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, was excited about seeing him again. At 6 o'clock, Elena closed the bakery and went upstairs to her apartment to get ready. She stared at her closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide what one wore to dinner with a supernatural being. Adrian had said to wear something comfortable, but what did that mean? Comfortable for what? She finally settled on dark jeans, a soft green sweater that brought out her eyes, and ankle boots. Nothing too formal, nothing too casual. As she was putting on lipstick, her phone rang. It was her mother, Isabella, calling from Portland. Mija, how are you? Her mother's warm voice came through the phone. I've been thinking about you all day. Elena's mother had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong, even from 200 miles away. I'm fine, Mama. Just busy with the bakery. Are you eating enough? You work too hard, Elena. You need to find a nice man and settle down. If only she knew, Elena thought wryly. I actually have a dinner date tonight. Oh, the excitement in her mother's voice was immediate. Tell me about him. What's his name? What does he do? Elena closed her eyes. His name is Adrian, and he's, well, it's complicated. Complicated how? Is he married? Elena, please tell me you're not dating a married man. No, Mama, he's not married. It's just, we're very different people. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Your father always said that differences make relationships interesting. As long as he treats you with respect and makes you happy, that's what matters. Elena felt a pang of sadness. Her father would have known exactly what to do in this situation. He had always been her voice of reason, her anchor. Now she was navigating this impossible situation alone. I miss Papa, Elena said softly. I know, Mija. I miss him too. But he would want you to be happy. He would want you to live your life, not hide away in that bakery all the time. After hanging up with her mother, Elena felt a strange sense of resolve. Her father had made some kind of deal with Adrian, had trusted him enough to promise him companionship. Maybe there was more to this vampire than supernatural powers and dangerous beauty. Elena arrived at the mansion promptly at 8 o'clock. This time, Adrian was waiting for her on the front steps, looking devastatingly handsome in casual black slacks and a dark blue sweater that made his eyes even more striking. His hair was slightly tousled as if he had run his fingers through it nervously. "Elena?" he said, his voice warm with what seemed like genuine pleasure. "I wasn't entirely certain you would come."
"I keep my promises," Elena replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded.
Adrian smiled and offered her his arm. "Shall we?" He led her not into the mansion, but around to a garden area Elena hadn't noticed the night before. String lights hung between ancient oak trees, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. A small table was set for two with fine china and crystal glasses. Candles flickered in hurricane lamps, casting dancing shadows on the white tablecloth. "This is beautiful," Elena said, genuinely impressed. "I thought you might be more comfortable outside," Adrian said, pulling out her chair. "The mansion can be overwhelming." As Elena sat down, she noticed that only one place setting had food. Adrian's side of the table held only a wine glass filled with what looked like red wine, though something about it made her stomach turn. "You're not eating?" she asked. Adrian's expression became carefully neutral. "I have a very restricted diet. I hope you don't mind." Elena gestured toward his glass. "Is that?" "Yes," he said simply. "I won't lie to you about what I am, Elena. I feed on blood to survive. But I want you to know that I never harm innocents. I have arrangements with blood banks, donors who are well compensated, criminals who—" He trailed off. "Perhaps that's not appropriate dinner conversation." Aylin surprised herself by laughing. "Adrian, nothing about this is appropriate. I'm having dinner with a vampire. I think normal social rules have gone out the window." Adrian's face lit up with delight. "You have a wonderfully pragmatic attitude about impossible situations. My father always said that life is too short to waste time denying reality even when reality is inconvenient." "Your father was a wise man. I enjoyed our conversations over the years." Elena looked up from her salad, which was surprisingly delicious. "You talked to him regularly?" "Every few months. He would come here and we would discuss philosophy, literature, history. Miguel was far more educated than his job suggested. He spoke 4 languages fluently and had read more books than most university professors." This revelation stunned Elena. Her father had barely finished high school, or so she had always believed. 4 languages: Spanish, English, French, and Portuguese. He also had a working knowledge of Latin, which surprised me. We often discussed ancient Roman poetry. Elena set down her fork. "I don't understand. My father was a construction worker. He never talked about books or poetry at home." Adrian's expression grew sad. "Miguel was protecting you from his past. He had been many things before he became your father. A scholar, a translator, a man who made some very dangerous enemies in Mexico. Coming to America and taking a simple job was his way of keeping you safe. Dangerous enemies? That's a story for another dinner, if you're willing to have another dinner with me." Elena realized that Adrian had just skillfully deflected her question while also asking her out again. "You're very smooth, aren't you?" "I've had 300 years to practice conversation," he said with a self-deprecating smile, "though I confess I'm terribly out of practice with beautiful women who aren't afraid of me." "Who says I'm not afraid of you?" Adrian studied her face carefully. "Are you?" Elena considered the question honestly. "I should be. Everything I know about vampires suggests I should be terrified, but sitting here with you, talking about my father, I don't feel afraid. I feel confused, intrigued, and completely out of my depth, but not afraid." "What do you feel when you look at me?" The question was quietly intense, and Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She looked at Adrian, really looked at him. His perfect features, his otherworldly grace, the way he seemed to glow softly in the candlelight. But beyond the supernatural beauty, she saw something else: loneliness, hope, and a vulnerability that surprised her. "I see someone who's been alone for a very long time," she said softly. Adrian's breath caught, and for a moment his carefully maintained composure slipped. You see more than most." They talked for hours. Adrian told her about some of his travels, carefully editing out the more violent aspects of his existence. He spoke of seeing the construction of great cathedrals, of witnessing historical events she had only read about in books. In return, Aylin told him about growing up with her father, about her dreams of expanding the bakery, about the little joys and struggles of human life. "Do you ever regret it?" Aylin asked as the evening wound down. "Being what you are?" Adrian was quiet for a long time. "There are aspects of my existence that bring me great sorrow. The isolation, the inability to form lasting connections with humans, watching everyone I care about age and die while I remain unchanged. But there have also been wonders, seeing the world change and evolve, experiencing beauty in ways that humans cannot, having time to truly appreciate art and literature and music. What's the worst part? The hunger," he said without hesitation. "Not just for blood, though that's a constant presence, but the hunger for connection, for understanding, for someone to know what I am and not flee in terror." Elena felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous softening toward this beautiful, dangerous man. And what's the best part? Adrian smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Tonight, this conversation. The way you're looking at me right now, like I'm a person rather than a monster." As Elena drove home that night, she replayed every moment of the evening. Adrian had been charming, intelligent, and surprisingly gentle. He had made no moves to touch her, had respected her boundaries, and had seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her as a person rather than viewing her as prey or a conquest. The most disturbing part was how much she had enjoyed herself. For the first time in months, she had felt truly engaged, intellectually stimulated by conversation that went beyond the mundane concerns of running a business. Adrian was unlike anyone she had ever met, and not just because of his supernatural nature. Her phone buzzed with a text as she was getting ready for bed. "Thank you for a wonderful evening." "Sweet dreams, Elena." ATA, she stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Thank you for dinner." It was unexpected. In a good way, I hope. Elena hesitated, then typed honestly, "In a very good way. I'm glad. Until dinner number 2? Elena's finger hovered over the keyboard. She was standing at a crossroads, and she knew that her next response would determine the direction her life would take. She could say no, walk away from this impossible situation, and return to her safe, predictable existence. Or she could take a leap into the unknown. "Until dinner number 2, she typed and hit send before she could change her mind. Adrian's response came immediately. "I'm looking forward to it." As Elena finally drifted off to sleep, she found herself looking forward to it too. She was having dinner with a vampire, and against all logic and reason, she was starting to care about him. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with an anticipation that made her pulse quicken and her dreams fill with golden eyes and dangerous smiles. She had 6 more dinners to figure out what she was getting herself into, and 6 more chances to decide if she was brave enough to fall for someone who existed in a world she was only beginning to understand. The debt her father had owed was becoming something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with the growing connection between a lonely vampire and a woman who was discovering that her capacity for accepting the impossible was far greater than she had ever imagined. The second dinner took place in Adrian's library, surrounded by centuries of collected books and artifacts. Elena arrived wearing a simple black dress that made her feel more confident, and she found Adrian waiting with an expression that seemed almost nervous. The table was smaller this time, more intimate, and Elena noticed he had prepared her favorite foods based on their previous conversation. "You remembered I love Italian cuisine," she said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "I remember everything you tell me," Adrian replied, his eyes serious. "Every word is precious to me." As they ate, Adrian shared more of his history. He had been turned into a vampire in 1724 by a woman named Vivienne, who had abandoned him shortly after his transformation. He had spent decades learning to control his hunger and centuries learning to live in a world that feared creatures like him. "Do you hate her?" Elena asked. "The woman who turned you?" Adrian considered the question. I did for many years, but hatred is exhausting when you have eternity to carry it. Now I simply feel empty when I think of her. She gave me immortality but no guidance on how to use it wisely. What would you have done differently? If you could go back? I would have learned sooner that immortality without connection is simply a beautifully decorated prison. I spent too many decades hiding from humanity instead of trying to understand it. Elena set down her wine glass and studied his face. Is that what you're trying to do now? Understand humanity through me? No, Adrian said firmly. I'm trying to understand you, Elena. Not as a representative of your species, but as yourself. You fascinate me in ways that have nothing to do with being human and everything to do with being you. The third dinner was different. Elena arrived to find Adrian in his kitchen, actually cooking. He moved with fluid grace around the space, and Elena was surprised to see how domestic he could look despite his otherworldly beauty. You cook? She asked, accepting a glass of wine. I've had 3 centuries to learn various skills, Adrian said, stirring something that smelled incredible. Cooking helps me understand human pleasure, even if I can't fully experience it myself. Elena watched him work, noticing how careful he was, how much attention he paid to every detail. What's the longest you've gone without human blood? The question slipped out before she could stop it, and Adrian's hand stilled for a moment. 3 days. It becomes difficult after that. I become less human, more predator. Have you ever killed anyone? Adrian turned to face her, his expression grave. Yes. In my early years, before I learned control, before I understood that I could survive without taking lives, those deaths haunt me, Elena. They are part of why I've lived in isolation for so long. Elena felt a chill, but also something unexpected, a desire to comfort him. How many? 7 people, over my first 10 years as a vampire. I haven't killed anyone in over 2 centuries, but the guilt doesn't fade with time. What changed? I met a priest named Father Martinez in Mexico in 1756. He saw what I was but didn't flee. Instead, he helped me understand that being a monster was a choice, not an inevitability. Elena's breath caught. Martinez? That was my father's surname. Adrian nodded solemnly. Father Eduardo Martinez was your great-great-great-grandfather. Your family has a long history with creatures like me. The 4th dinner brought revelations that shook Elena's understanding of her family history. Adrian showed her portraits and documents that proved her ancestry was far more complicated than she had known. The Martinez family had been guardians and allies to supernatural beings for generations, protecting them from hunters while ensuring they didn't harm innocents. My father knew all of this? Elena asked, staring at a letter written in her great-grandfather's handwriting. Miguel was the last of the Martinez guardians. He was supposed to train you to pass on the family knowledge, but he wanted to give you a normal life instead. So when he came to you for help, he was returning to his family's ancient duty. He knew I was lonely, knew I needed someone who could understand what I am without judgment. But instead of training you as a guardian, he offered himself as a friend and promised to find me a companion who could see past the darkness. Elena felt pieces of her life rearranging themselves into a new pattern. That's why you saved his life, not just because he asked, but because of our family history. I saved his life because he was dying and I had the power to help. But yes, the Martinez family's long friendship with my kind influenced my decision. The 5th dinner was quiet, contemplative. Elena found herself watching Adrian more carefully, noticing things she had missed before. The way he never quite met the eyes of the servers who brought her food, how he positioned himself so that he could see all the exits. The careful control he maintained over every movement, every expression. You always on guard, she observed. 3 centuries of being hunted tends to create certain habits. Are you on guard with me? Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Less and less each evening. You make me want to forget to be careful. Is that good or bad? With you, I'm beginning to think it might be the best thing that's happened to me in 300 years. The 6th dinner was different from all the others. Adrian seemed restless, agitated. He paced the library while Elena ate, his usual perfect composure cracked. "What's wrong?" Elena finally asked. "Tomorrow is our 7th dinner," he said without looking at her. "After that, you're free to go. The debt will be settled, and you can return to your normal life. And if I don't want to return to my normal life—"
Adrian stopped pacing, his back to her.
"What are you saying?" Elena stood up, her heart pounding. "I'm saying that somewhere between the first dinner and tonight, this stopped being about settling a debt. At least for me." Adrian turned to face her, his eyes blazing with golden light. "Elena, you don't understand what you're suggesting. Being with me means accepting a life in the shadows. It means danger, secrecy, and eventually watching me outlive everyone you love. It also means being with someone who makes me feel more alive than I've felt in years," Elena said, stepping closer to him. "Someone who sees me, really sees me, in a way no one else ever has. I could hurt you. I could lose control. You won't? How can you be so certain?" Elena reached up and touched his face gently. "Because you've had a dozen opportunities to hurt me, and instead you've shown me more consideration and respect than any human man ever has." Adrian closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. "Elena, if you stay, if you choose this life, there's no going back. I'm not human. I can't give you children, a normal marriage, growing old together. Can you give me love?" Adrian's eyes snapped open. "More love than you could possibly imagine. An eternity of it if you'll have me." Elena felt tears sting her eyes. "Then that's enough." The 7th dinner never happened as planned. Instead, Elena found herself in Adrian's arms as centuries of loneliness melted away in the face of an impossible love that had grown from duty into devotion. They talked until dawn, making plans, discussing the practicalities of a relationship between a human and a vampire. Adrian would need to teach her about his world, about the dangers and the politics of supernatural society. Elena would need to decide how much of her human life she was willing to sacrifice for love. "There's one more thing," Adrian said as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the curtains. "I can offer you immortality if you want it. The transformation is possible, though not without risks." Elena considered this. "Would you want that, for me to become like you? I want whatever makes you happy. If you choose to remain human, I'll spend every day of your natural life loving you. If you choose transformation, we'll have eternity together." "I need time to think about that," Elena said. "Of course, we have all the time in the world." As Elena drove home that morning, she felt as though she was living in a dream. She had fallen in love with a vampire, and against all odds, he loved her too. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. "Thank you for seeing the man instead of the monster. Thank you for choosing love over fear." Elena smiled and typed back, "Thank you for showing me that fairy tales can come true, even the dark ones." "Especially the dark ones," came his immediate reply. "Sweet dreams, my love." She sat beside the headstone and told Miguel everything that had happened, about Adrian, about their family history, about the choice she was facing. "I think I understand now, Papa," she said softly. "You knew this would happen. You knew I would fall for him. Is that what you promised him? Not just companionship, but love." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and Elena could almost hear her father's voice saying that love was the most powerful force in any world, human or supernatural. 3 months later, Elena made her decision. She chose love over safety, adventure over predictability, eternity over mortality. The transformation was painful but brief, and when she opened her eyes as a vampire, the first face she saw was Adrian's, filled with joy and wonder. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Elena smiled, her new supernatural senses taking in the world with startling clarity. "Only that I waited so long to say yes." They were married in the mansion's garden on a moonlit night, surrounded by the few supernatural friends Adrian had made over the centuries. Elena's mother attended, surprisingly accepting of her daughter's unusual choice after Adrian charmed her completely during a carefully orchestrated meeting. "Your father would be proud," Isabella whispered to Elena during the ceremony. "He always said you were destined for an extraordinary life." Elena looked at Adrian, impossibly handsome in his black suit, his eyes shining with love and gratitude, and realized that her father had given her the greatest gift imaginable. Not just his sacrifice to save his own life, but his wisdom in knowing that true love transcended the boundaries between worlds. The debt had been paid, not with money or obligation, but with trust, understanding, and a love that would last for eternity. Elena Martinez had arrived at Adrian Blackwood's mansion to settle her father's debt, and discovered instead that some debts are meant to be paid with the heart. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife under a canopy of stars, Elena realized that she had never been settling a debt at all. She had been claiming her destiny, stepping into a love story that began with her great-great-great-grandfather's kindness to a lonely vampire and would continue for as long as their love endured. And in a world where immortal beings could love as deeply as mortals, that would be forever.